Hi, I'm Chris Brown, Associate Publisher at Bobbit, and welcome to this episode of Fast Forward Interview Series. In this episode, I interview Marty Kuhn, President of Mike Albert Fleet Solutions, and Brian Bathe, Vice President of Information Technology at Mike Albert. We discuss new technologies around predictive analytics, AI, telematics, data sourcing, and connected vehicles to really understand the solutions that are driving efficiencies and delivering insights for fleets. Brian, Marty, welcome to this edition of Fast Forward Video Series.
Chris, thanks for having us.
Yeah, appreciate the invite. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, let's dig right in. Marty, I'm going to throw a couple of questions to you, kind of big picture stuff starting off. So can't believe we're halfway through 2023, right? But looking into the near future, what kind of trends do you see that fleet managers should be keeping their eye on? Maybe, let's talk about pain points or opportunities, and how is Mike Albert addressing them?
No, great question. I think I'm going to avoid the obvious, which is kind of the pinned up demand in the OEMs, because that's something that unfortunately is unavoidable, and kind of focus on some things that we can control. Interestingly enough, earlier this week, there was a pretty interesting article that came out around the average age of vehicles on the road, and ultimately they've hit an all-time high, right? It's not surprising based on the aforementioned comment that I meant around the pinned up demand, but that's a result of many things. The immediate takeaway is the longer a vehicle's on the road, the more maintenance we expect it to require, right? So costs go up. That's a key consideration of fleet management companies and the clients of these. So preventative maintenance is always preferred. Mike Albert specifically offers solutions like Albert IQ and driver vehicle inspection reporting that assists in ensuring that these fleet managers are doing a good job in providing data to assist with controlling these costs. A more pointed response would be, it's super important to help the client understand what these inflection points are, meaning at what point does it become detrimental where you're paying more maintenance than purchasing a new vehicle. So that is very important to us. From my perspective, there continues to be a greater reliance on data-driven insights. That's my background. That's kind of what I live and breathe. When you think about, as fleets become more connected, and the volume of data they generate increases, fleet managers are looking to their fleet management companies to help them make sense of all this data, right? It's not easily readable, and it can be somewhat difficult to obtain. So they're kind of relying on us to be able to provide a level of insight in actionable follow-ups on how to manage it, right? The ability to provide actionable insights from this has become a key value prop, really, for all fleet management companies. This trend is driving a shift from purely focused service-based relationships to more of a consulting-based one, where fleet management companies like Mike Albert act as a strategic advisor in helping their clients make more informed decisions.
Sure. And looking at just sort of drilling down on kind of the technologies and the systems and kind of the processes that you guys are looking at, can you say anything there on what fleet managers really need to be keeping their eye on?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot to unpack, so I'll attempt to kind of narrow it down to 4 or 5 items that we're really focused on, and that the market is really indicating that other fleet management companies should be focused on. First and foremost, it's telematics, right? And what we call internally kind of the Internet of Things. These technologies provide these real-time tracking of vehicles, including their location, the speed, idle time, and a multitude of other parameters, right? The data can be used to optimize routes, reduce fuel consumption, improve driver performance. One of the big things that I've seen in this transportation space is the lack of optimization. An individual drives to a certain city or a destination and comes back with an empty load. Technology and transportation are a little bit further behind some of the other industries. So I think there's a huge amount of opportunity. Integrating with this type of network, or what I would call connectivity around devices, really allows us to further enhance these capabilities. You can provide additional data, as simple as the vehicle condition, but then there's an opportunity for other external factors like weather and traffic. Kind of secondarily to that, we are thinking internally around kind of the AI functionality and machine learning. These are the type of technologies that not only can be used to analyze all of this information, but it provides that actionable insight that's not readily known or readily available to a client where this isn't their forte. For example, AI can predict maintenance needs based on vehicle usage patterns. They can identify inefficiencies in routes, and then provide recommendations for improving driver performance. Kind of unpacking it a little bit further, the third thing that we're highly focused on is really kind of predictive analytics. This goes beyond traditional data analysis and predictive analysis. It really uses historical data and types of machine learning algorithms to predict future events, right? Nobody wants to be on the side of the road with their vehicle broken down. So being able to pinpoint, right, the usage of a transmission or the usage and or wear and tear on a vehicle's engines or tires, right? These vehicles are being used to generate revenue for clients. So it is increasingly important that this is a huge focal point and that we're providing that level of insight. Really, at the end of the day, it allows kind of the management of the total cost out. And if you think about the usage of fleet management companies, and if you have an astute CFO in place, that's what they're thinking about, right? How do you balance that cost of these vehicles and the usage of the vehicles compared to the revenue that's being generated by some of these vehicles? I think kind of just moving on, a fourth point and very important, Brian and I have started to discuss this at a very kind of elementary level, is with all of this increased data, right? And being able to have the connectivity, across a multitude of devices, it's a cybersecurity, right? As vehicles become more connected, the risk of these threats are increasing. So fleets and fleet management companies need to consider solutions that protect against these types of threats. And most importantly, ensure the security of their vehicle and driver data. Each individual state has very finite rules and regulations on the sharing of data, PII containment, and things like that. So this is going to become an increasingly more important point that businesses in this space are going to have to kind of focus on. And I'd say, from a fifth kind of example, if you will, fleet management software, right? These are the type of systems that provide a centralized platform for managing all aspects of a fleet, from vehicle acquisition and maintenance to dispatching and route optimization. Modern fleet management software is nowadays it's cloud-based and it can be accessed from any device, and it kind of gives you the flexibility and real-time visibility into fleet operations. I think about some of our larger customers that have thousands of vehicles with us, right? For them to be able to look on a map and have real-time visual snapshots of where all of their vehicles are, whether they're delivering parts, trying to do service or deliver groceries, right? It is increasingly important that level of sophistication and that full view is there. And it really requires us and others in the space to really fully optimize, kind of what I would call an ERP system of sorts. Kind of one additional item I think I would add, very similar, we talked about the age of the vehicles. The last couple of weeks, we've had discussions internally around dash cameras, right? It's kind of big brother's coming knocking. But the reality is a lot of our clients have started to suggest that they think that these will allow them to provide meaningful returns. Specifically, if you think about it, right, this type of technology improves the driver behavior because they realize that they're being watched. It reduces accidents and most specifically kind of reduces false litigation claims in those accidents. Plus, with supply chain for replacement parts being severely constrained, reducing accidents substantially increases fleet efficiency and kind of reduces the TCO. You heard me talk briefly earlier. There's a high degree of focus internally on our end with the considerations around when and where to make all of these investments, right? The previous 5 points that I just stated, you can't necessarily do them all at the same time. And, while everyone would like to be, kind of best in class, you have to figure out where do you make these investments? When do you make these investments? And it really requires you to listen to the market, to listen to your associates that are kind of manning the phones and have their finger on the pulse, if you will, with the clients. And most importantly, understanding what the feedback's coming from the usage of these type of technologies across the space.
Well, great. Well, a lot to unpack there, Marty. But hey, listen, Brian, I want to kind of flip it to you from where you sit. Talk about some of the technologies and the systems and the processes that are really important to fleets.
Yeah, Chris. Yeah, so Marty brings up a lot, right? I mean, that's a lot that that our clients, that the fleet admin has to deal with to properly manage a modern fleet. So yeah, you have to have modern fleet management software to do that, right? Our product's called Overdrive. And right, I mean, it's everything Marty's talking about, right? You got to be able to aggregate financial data, you got to be able to aggregate vehicle maintenance, kind of performance data. Depending on the industry you're working in, there's compliance information. Telematics is a big stream of data for us. And then, coming up is stuff like dash cam, IoT data, right? There's all this data that needs to be aggregated, analyzed. The environments are a lot more complex than they used to. Now we're talking about hybrid cloud and multi-cloud environments. Right? I mean, so the connectivity complexity is there. So it's a lot to kind of deal with, right? And one of the things we really try to work on is making sure that we're bringing actionable insights to our clients. So there's no way that anybody can wade through all this data through reports and data dumps or whatever and draw their own powerful conclusion. You have to have the fleet management software, having predictive analytics built in where it's actually going through this data, bringing up only the exceptions, right? And then maybe you have some kind of tuning effort you need to do after that based on, kind of the domain of that these vehicles are working in and stuff. So then you can maybe fine tune it after that. But yeah, I mean, the fleet management software. So we leverage like machine learning to get at some of the, patterns and everything like that and make the predictions. So that fleet can run more efficiently. A lot around vehicle maintenance and vehicle health to try to make sure there's, no interruptions in business, no breakdowns, trying to reduce that total cost of ownership on the vehicle. So varied kind of complexities of technology, and you really need kind of somebody else doing all that, right? So we have engineers that work in machine learning, just rules engines, data aggregation. And so all of that can be provided and be funneled up through the fleet management software, provide the actionable insights, provide the data visualization, right? I mean, a lot of times that helps to uncover issues. So there's kind of a lot there. It's automation, it's kind of harnessing an awful lot of different technologies, but ultimately the fleet admin should be able to kind of access all of that through, some fleet management, dashboards and tools that make all that accessible for their fleet. And so they can kind of concentrate on what they need to keep that fleet running great.
Brian, you mentioned predictive analytics, and it seemed to be kind of theory like 3 years ago. I mean, are we really there where in fleet where it's really a meaningful part of the tool set? How do you see predictive analytics kind of shaking out today?
It's definitely there. It's definitely real. I mean, the usage has really increased. I think, what we've traditionally built a lot on is around the telematics, the maintenance data, the financial data, because there was just such huge volumes there, right? Those were data sets that were kind of ripe for the picking. And so we've really concentrated a lot on trying to leverage that data to make predictions. And then ultimately, we've kind of proven those models out, right? So, I mean, everybody goes through that phase of technology adoption where you're kind of experimenting, where now you're starting to build some more proof of concepts. In those phases, you're involving the human element enough, right, that you have enough feedback to understand, am I building something that's predicting true life, right? I don't want to bog down my fleet admins with false positives and stuff like that, right? And so there is it's a pretty big endeavor to build out these models and everything like that, so they actually predict good and that there's the kind of a real payoff there, right? And so we're kind of constantly monitoring that. We like I said, we have enough manual kind of oversight, but all of this is automated with large amounts of data coming through. So we're definitely able to do that right now. And I think there's a lot more, right? I mean, I think it's like That's what's going on. Can we start pulling in additional data sets, maybe that are client specific to marry up with those data, right? Dash cam information, a lot's coming off of that. You're starting to see more and more the vehicles have, additional built-in sensors, more cameras built in, right? And each one of those can kind of start to leverage, AI to see if there's, pedestrians walking by, can I get more out of my driver behavior kind of stuff than I have, right? Are my drivers properly slowing down when there's potholes and, like I said, pedestrians and all that kind of stuff? And so if I can start getting more data points, I can start doing a lot more prediction as long as I'm harnessing those and kind of building the right models around those to leverage them.
Sure. Yeah. And actually, just kind of go to the last question. We've been talking about telematics and kind of various capacities, right? But it almost seems like that telematics for fleets is kind of table stakes. Can we wrap in like really what are the next steps for using telematics? Again, you started to get into some of that stuff, but just kind of wrap it into how that would manifest in a telematics system for fleets.
Yeah, I think telematics definitely is table stakes anymore, right? If you want to get the most out of that fleet, those resources, both human and the vehicle, telematics is a great way to kind of monitor that, and so you can bring efficiencies. So currently today you can maintenance and driver behavior and vehicle utilization, right? This is what we provide. So everybody should be able to harness that telematics data to get that. I think then you can marry that up with what you know about your business, right? So here I think you can kind of start to derive some efficiencies and stuff like that out of looking at what drivers, what techs are getting more done in a day, right? With that data. And then you can kind of start to learn some of those patterns and try to start to educate the rest of your fleet on those, right? I think that's a very powerful thing right there, that you can kind of learn from yourself. And I think telematics can do that. So I think it's like learning to like we've gotten that, maybe we've gotten the first couple layers of telematics there, right? Like we used to just like see where the vehicles were, and then we kind of went through and did the driver behavior stuff. And then we can do some route optimization. I think now kind of taking that further and further, marrying up more data sets, scheduling data and all that kind of stuff back up with this telematics, we can kind of start to derive and get some more efficiency out of our techs and the resources. That's where I see I think it going near term.
Yeah, you make a really good point about efficiencies in these different areas and how telematics is tackling that. Well, this has been great. Brian, Marty, thank you so much for joining me today on Fast Forward video series and all this great information.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, Chris. Appreciate the time. Thank you.